Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I trust you're keeping safe and I appreciate you dropping by. Let me start with the crude oil markets, and this morning I asked, are the algos, the algorithms in the oil markets as stupid as the New York Stock Exchange algos? Because Donald Trump is testing that thesis in real time as we speak. WTI surged as much as 35% on Trump's production announcement, which took us back to March 20 levels. That chart is from Bianco Research, and my major point is caveat emptor. This is a 35% rally, and you can see it's hardly getting back. It did not even get back above $30. Trump told CNBC he spoke to Putin, MBS, and expects Saudis and Russia to announce a 10 million barrel cut. The question is that per day? Paul Wallace, oil has spiked on this tweet, just spoke to my friend MBS of Saudi Arabia, who spoke with President Putin of Russia, and I expect and hope that they will be cutting back approximately 10 million barrels and maybe substantially more. If it happens, will be great for the oil and gas industry. Now, 22nd of March, I wrote about COVID-19 and a rolling, sudden, hard stop. We are moving from a world of hyper-connectedness to a world of quarantine. A complete quarantine is the only way to vaccine this 21st century world of ours from a coronavirus that has started behaving a lot like the once-in-a-century pathogen we've been worried about. That's Bill Gates. And I said then the price of crude oil is perfectly correlated to this hard stop. Bill Gates is calling for a 10-week shutdown in the US, says any confusion will only extend economic pain. Just think what a 10-week shutdown is going to do to oil demand. And just a quick diversion to Kapuściński, oil creates the illusion of a completely changed life, life without work, life for free. Oil is a resource that anesthetizes thought, blurs vision, corrupts, kindles extraordinary emotions and hopes, since oil is above all a great temptation. It is the temptation of ease, wealth, strength, fortune, power. It is a filthy, foul-smelling liquid that squirts obligingly up into the air and falls back to earth as a rustling shower of money. And indeed, yesterday, that's precisely what Trump managed to do. And I suspect some buddies of his managed to get out of their oil positions or hedge them, one or the other. Because there is a regime implosion coming close to you, and just as Hunter S. Thompson said, there is no honest way to explain it, because the only people who really know where the edge is are the ones who have gone over. And to my point, Javier Blas tweeted, Trafigura, co-head of oil trading, says consumption may be down 35 million barrels per day now due to the coronavirus. And with everyone focused on Saudi, Russia, Trump, he notes, we have no hope of production cuts matching the demand destruction. And that is the point to hold on to. And that's why what Trump has given us is a unique opportunity to reset shorts. And that is the point. He has now shot his shot. And this, in my opinion, is not the tariff war algo gig which he played all last year, rather successfully, I might add. You remember Margin Call, the movie? Well, COVID-19 is precisely that. It's nothing to do with whether it's justified, sellers are too many, storage will soon be full. We are not reverting to a hyper-connected world for a long while. Oil producers will just have to lump it. It's nothing to do with whether it's justified, sellers are too many, and storage will soon be full, though it's having a little squeeze higher right now as we speak. Home thoughts. People visit a night market in Shenyang in northeastern Liaoning province. Rather great photograph from AFP. Took me to the Polana where I once watched a sunrise, and it really is the jewel in Serena Hotels' crown. I hail from Mombasa, and the Indian Ocean has always held an endless fascination for me. I recall dimly lit dhows in Tudor Creek in Mombasa. Later I read Felipe Fernandez Amesto, who said, "The precocity of the Indian Ocean as a zone of long-range navigation and cultural exchange is one of the glaring facts of history made possible by the reversible escalator of the monsoons. The reversible escalator of the monsoons allowed this cultural exchange from Goa to Maputo, from Oman to Zanzibar. In fact, my received history includes the narrative of a grandfather coming to East Africa as a stowaway on a dhow more than a century ago. And I remember visiting the Polana, and it's the furthest reach, Maputo, of that reversible escalator, and the land of the most flavoursome tiger prawns." This is a photograph I took of the sunrise from the hotel room some years ago. Don DeLillo, everything is barely weeks, everything is days. We have minutes to live. Certainly feels that way. And then I came across an article, Stockholm, Are You Listening? Why Don DeLillo Deserves the Nobel Prize. And I can't think of anyone who more richly deserves it. He is an extraordinary writer. If you haven't read him, please do. A partial list of his subjects and preoccupations includes cinema, the power of the image over that of the word, the Cold War, nuclear anxiety, our obsession with sports, technology, its often sinister ubiquity, the airborne toxic event, the shattering effect of the Kennedy assassination, its never answered questions, the eerily similar effects of the 9/11 attacks, the derangements of celebrity and fame, the comic and disturbing undercurrents of ordinary middle-class life, the fevers of finance capital, the delusional plutocratic quest for a technological fix for the problem of mortality, and proleptically and persistently the inextricable centrality of terrorism to the way Americans regard themselves in the wider world. As he famously put it in Mao too, it is now gunmen and bomb makers, not novelists, who shape our narratives and make raids on human consciousness. As he said, there's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of the things they aren't telling us. That was a quote I used in my article about the origin of the COVID-19. There are dead stars that still shine because their light is trapped in time. Where do I stand in this light which does not strictly exist? It is much simpler to bury reality than it is to dispose of dreams. And then that passage from the angel Esmeralda. The specialist is monitoring data on his mission console When a voice breaks in, a voice that carried with it a strange and unspecifiable poignancy. He checks in with his flight dynamics and conceptual paradigm officers at Colorado Command. We have a deviate tomahawk. We copy, there's a voice. We have gross oscillation here. There's some interference. I've gone redundant, but I'm not sure it's helping. Thank you, Colorado. It is probably just selective noise. You are negative red on the step function quad. It was a voice, I told them. We have just received an affirm on selective noise. We will correct Tomahawk. In the meantime, advise you to stay redundant. The voice, in contrast to Colorado's metallic pigeon, is a mélange of repartee, laughter and song with a quality of purest, sweetest sadness. Somehow, we were picking up signals from radio programs of 40, 50, 60 years ago. This is a photograph of Diani from Uduni. Reverting to A.A. Olomi, the descriptions of Israfil emphasize the apocalyptic element within Islam. The Day of Judgment is a major component of faith, and it is nigh. And there is certainly a fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot. It is also a reminder that the end cannot be predicted. Israfil has had the horn poised on his lips since the very beginning. Life goes on, and so Muslims often held a pragmatic approach to the end. It comes when it does. Be mindful of the end, but do not let it consume. Certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything, it seemed, was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. Albert Camus. In this respect, this is the plague, La Peste. In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that a pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. But it doesn't always pass away, and from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. For a long time, God gazed down on this town with eyes of compassion, but he grew weary of waiting. His eternal hope was too long deferred, and now he has turned his face away from us. And so, God's light withdrawn, we walk in darkness, in the thick darkness of this plague. What is clear is that the Malcolm Gladwell moment has definitively arrived. And that's why each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know. For whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. The zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood, and the zeitgeist of 2020 is simply indescribable. Everything is barely weeks, everything is days, we have minutes to live. This AP shows one overwhelmed New York funeral home director saying this virus took religion out of the equation. And as I tweeted, COVID-19 is a karmic level stealth assassin. Latest on COVID-19, there are now over 1 million confirmed cases and 53,190 deaths worldwide, William Yang 120. There is a remarkable essay in the New Statesman, Why This Crisis is a Turning Point in History. The deserted streets will fill again, and we will leave our screen-lit boroughs blinking with relief. This is not a temporary rupture in an otherwise stable equilibrium. The crisis through which we are living is a turning point in history. The era of peak globalization is over. An economic system that relied on worldwide production and long supply chains is morphing into one that will be less interconnected. But with the noble dedication of its workers, the virus will be held at bay. Our political system will survive intact. Not many countries will be so fortunate. Governments everywhere are struggling through the narrow passage between suppressing the virus and crashing the economy. Many will stumble and fall. In the view of the future to which progressive thinkers cling, the future is an embellished version of the recent past. The hyper-globalization of the last few decades is not coming back either. The virus has exposed fatal weaknesses in the economic system that was patched up after the 2008 financial crisis. Liberal capitalism is bust. A situation in which so many of the world's essential medical supplies originate in China or any other single country will not be tolerated. Production in these and other sensitive areas will be reshored as a matter of national security. The airline industry will shrink as people travel less. Harder borders are going to be an enduring feature of the global landscape. A narrow goal of economic efficiency will no longer be practicable for governments. John Stuart Mill, in his Principles of Political Economy in 1848, called it a stationary state economy. The pandemic has abruptly accelerated geopolitical change. Combined with the collapse in oil prices, the uncontrolled spread of the virus in Iran could destabilize its theocratic regime. With revenues plunging, Saudi Arabia is also at risk. There can be no assurance that a meltdown in the Gulf will produce anything other than a long period of chaos. There are 25 million guest workers in the Gulf, all of whom are headed home. In contrast, the advance of East Asia will surely continue. The most successful responses to the epidemic thus far have been in Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. China's position is more complex given its record of cover-ups and opaque statistics. The performance during the pandemic is hard to assess. Certainly, it is not a model any democracy could or should emulate. If Europe does not rise to this unprecedented challenge, the whole European structure loses its raison d'etre for the people. Increasing influence on the EU will come from Russia in the struggle with the Saudis that triggered the oil price collapse in March 2020. Putin has played the stronger hand, indeed he has. In the US, Trump plainly considers refloating the economy more important than containing the virus. Puncturing an imaginary equilibrium, the virus has hastened a process of disintegration that has been underway for many years. It is always possible that some hitherto obscure parasitic organism may escape its accustomed ecological niche and expose the dense human populations that have become so conspicuous a feature of the earth to some fresh and perchance devastating mortality. Texture of everyday life is already altered. A sense of fragility is everywhere. It is not only society that feels shaky, so does the human position in the world. A post-apocalyptic future of the kind projected in the fiction of J.G. Ballard has become our present reality, but it is important to understand what this apocalypse reveals. Online pornography will likely boom, and much internet dating may consist of erotic exchanges that never end in a meeting of bodies. Augmented reality technology may be used to simulate fleshly encounters, and virtual sex could soon be normalized. Whether this is a move towards the good life may not be the most useful question to ask. Cyberspace relies on an infrastructure that can be damaged or destroyed by war or natural disaster. The internet allows us to avoid the isolation that plagues have brought in the past. It cannot enable human beings to escape their mortal flesh or avoid the ironies of progress. An advantage of quarantine is that it can be used to think afresh, clearing the mind of clutter and thinking how to live in an altered world is the task at hand. Reported cases of COVID-19 are set to pass 1 million in the coming hours. They did. Of those confirmed on Wednesday, 1 in 20 have died. And deaths have crossed 50,000 before Asia woke up this morning. Kate Cadell. The viral moment has arrived, as I said, on the 24th of February. Globally, the reported number of confirmed cases crossed the 1 million mark overnight. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and you see that in this. It took 110 days to get to 100,000 cases. It took 12 days to get to 200,000. It took 4 days to get to 300,000. It took 3 days to get to 400,000. It took 2 days to get to 500,000. It took 39 hours to get to 600,000. It took 34 hours to get to 700,000. It took 38 hours to get to 800,000. It took 29 hours to get to 900,000. It took 24 hours to get to 1 million. Dr. Fauci, the virus determines what the timetable is, not us. A reality TV star botched the response to a global pandemic, and now we're all imprisoned in our homes and forced to watch him daily. The greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. We are looking in the rearview mirror when we look at these statistics. In nearly every country in the world, when the virus reaches 100 people, number of cases begins to increase by 35% daily. At that rate, a country would reach 1 million cases just 31 days after reaching 100 cases. This is quite telling about how early on the virus story emerged. Graph plots number of news stories tracked by Bloomberg with words. Pneumonia-like is in white, COVID-19 is in orange. I remember this circular. I received this circular to all staff from Great Ormond Street Hospital today. 73 out of 181 staff have tested positive, and 318 staff members are off sick. We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw, alas. Healthcare workers are the most valuable human capital on earth at this moment. Why are so many accepting that they may be treated as if they were dispensable? A record 6.65 million Americans filed for unemployment benefit claims last week. Nuriel, Greater Depression, initial unemployment claims for last week were 6.6 million on top of 3.3 million of the previous week. So a surge in formal unemployment of 10 million in 2 weeks. This doesn't include dozens of millions not formally employed who can't file for unemployment claims. That is the world we're moving from, a world of hyper-connectedness to a world of quarantine. VL or Nike swoosh, economists debate shape of global recovery. A V-shape in which the rebound is as swift as the slump was the favoured trajectory early on, but now more are starting to worry about a U-shape. The most pessimistic are looking at global growth tracing an L or a W, or a more mangled path that bears little resemblance to Roman letters. U-shape, looking at China's trajectory and its impact on South Korea and the rest of the region. Chong-Hoon Park, head of Korea Economic Research at Standard Chartered Bank, favours a U over a V. L-shape, the virus runs into the second half of the year, forcing social distancing rules to remain beyond June. That's what's going to happen. W-shaped, the virus returns. Academics at Imperial College in London have warned that if efforts to control the pandemic are loosened prematurely, the virus could stage a comeback. Tick shape, also known as the Nike swoosh, level of economic output stays beneath the level of its pre-crisis trend well into 2021. There's a lack of animal spirits as people remain cautious over overspending or taking long-distance trips, especially if they have to deal with debts. By and large, we expect GDP to surpass its late 2019 level roughly 2 years after the trough. Look, world economists and policymakers are flummoxed by the exponential and multiplicative nature of the COVID-19, and a V-shaped recovery is a fantasy. Northman trader markets at the start of Q1 versus the start of Q2. 2020 may be the first year falling global GDP since World War II. Have a look at that from Adam Tooze. What's certain is that the whole global economy has been hit by an insidious, literally invisible circuit breaker. The current downturn presents an even more extreme event, a worldwide emergency that has left no safe haven. The virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved. As I said on the 24th of February, a rate cut or even 4 will produce a dead cat bounce and then a dynamic move to the downside. Policymakers cannot vaccine the market with rate cuts. This is non-linear and exponential. Steve Levine, in a very good article, without a vaccine for the coronavirus, we're barreling towards a depression-like downturn that could rival the 1930s. Just weeks after the stock market crashed in 1929, President Herbert Hoover assured the country that things were already back to normal. Liaquat Ahmed writes in Lords of Finance. 5 months later, in March 1930, Hoover said the worst would be over during the next 60 days. When that period ended, he said, we have passed the worst. Eventually, Ahmed writes, when the facts refused to obey Hoover's forecasts, he started to make them up. And we all know how that turned out, the Great Depression. And I can't agree more. You hit the pause button, then you hit the start button, and the machine starts running again. Forget that. A V-shaped recovery is a fantasy. Currency markets, euro dollar 108.19, dollar index 100.274, Japanese yen 108.06, Swiss franc 0.9747, the pound 123.51, Aussie 0.6052, India rupee 75.915, South Korean won 12.2966, Brazilian real 525.68, Egyptian pound 15.75, South African rand 18.533. I was bullish about Netflix last year, September 2019, and I put out a conviction buy. I stand by that. Gold 1611. Have a look at this from William Middlecoop in Goethe's 1831 drama Faust, about money printing. Scott Burke 777, the print shop. 24th of February, before a big sell-off, I said I thought gold is correlated to the coronavirus, which is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential. 22nd of March, I reiterated I still believe gold will turn viral to the upside. And I'm looking for $2,000 plus. I've written about the China emerging markets frontier feedback loop phenomenon, admittedly in September, when I said this phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. I said the rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are at the bleeding edge of the phenomenon. And I said the pressure point will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. Brazil, South Africa, Mexico. Police wear coronavirus-themed helmets as they patrol in Hyderabad during India's 21-day government-imposed nationwide lockdown. As I said previously, COVID-19 is a karmic level stealth assassin. Sub-Saharan Africa, coronavirus, el sistema colapsará muy rápido. And that's why I wrote, we're staring into the abyss of a zombie apocalypse. Ethiopia, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, have a look at the testing ratio per million. This is from Malet KS. Health Ministry projections seen by Politico outline a worst-case scenario for Ethiopia, predicting that 28 million people are at risk of contracting the virus. Health officials are now working on the assumption that the worst-case scenario in Ethiopia could already be an incubator for a super-spreading event, and that the health system will be overwhelmed in a few weeks. That is the base case. As I said on the 3rd of February, Bole is the epicenter. Leah Tedesse released her latest numbers. These are simply not in the realm of reality. We are looking in the rearview mirror. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. In nearly every country in the world, when a virus reaches 100 people, the number of cases begins to increase by 35% daily. At that rate, a country would reach 1 million cases just 31 days after reaching 100 cases. I calculate Sub-Saharan Africa will contract in 2020. We know that the coronavirus is exponential, non-linear, multiplicative, and what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 which is the phase Africa's in, and then boom. South African All Share is down 21.06% year to date. The Rand is at 18.5576 and going to 20. Egyptian pounds at 15.75. EGX 30 is down 32.28% year to date. In 2 days, the real Nigerians, not the ones on Twitter already complaining, God help us. Have a look at that video from OK James. Nigerian All Shares down 21.31%. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 5.51%. I wrote about debt, virus and locusts creating a perfect storm for Africa. In Kenya, we have 110 cases in the country, about 30 or 40 are cases of local transmission with no history of travel or contact with a COVID-19 patient. That's cluster, cluster, cluster. 29 new cases were not in isolation when detected. Now imagine how many people each of those found positive with the coronavirus infected. Kenya Shilling's at 105.60. Nairobi All Share is at minus 17.87%. And the NSE20 is minus 25.21% year to date. Thank you for listening.